What if Ned Stark never died at Baylor's September? What if the man who knelt wasn't the one who fell? Imagine this. The sword swings, the crowd gasps, but the head never drops. Because in this version of the tale, Varys moved quicker. The black cells ran deeper, and the spider spun a web no one ever saw coming. A web that changed the fate of Westeros forever. And it all begins beneath the Red Keep in silence. The city believed Eddard Stark died that day. Heads turned, blood pooled, but the face shown to the mob wasn't his. A faceless corpse, one of the condemned, glamored by one of Varys's whispers. A single illusion, enough to fool a crowd hungry for justice. Cersei never cared to inspect. Joffrey only wanted to feel powerful. Sansa screamed. Arya vanished. And Varys made sure no one looked twice. Below the dungeons, far beneath stone and shadow, Ned Stark woke in darkness. Shackled, broken, breathing, confused, betrayed, but alive. His body ached like shattered glass, his honor like rusted steel. He had confessed the lies to save his daughters, yet death had still come, or should have. Varys stood by him, silent at first, then whispered the truth. You're dead to the world, Lord Stark. Best stay that way, or Westeros burns before its time. That moment shattered everything Ned had known. For a man who believed in right and wrong, truth and treason, the lines had blurred. Survival had come not with honor, but with deception. And the spider asked only one thing: vanish, disappear, let the war above rage without him. His family would be protected. He was promised. Arya was in motion. Sansa was watched. The North would rise, yes, but without him. And so Eddard Stark, Warden of the North, died in the eyes of the world. But in the deep crypts beneath King's Landing, a different man began to live. Silent, watching, waiting, gathering whispers through Varys's little birds. He learned of Robb's war cry, of banners raised, of the twins and betrayal, of Winterfell in flames, of Bran and Rickon missing. He wept in silence. He broke 1,000 times. But he endured, because Varys had a plan, and Ned had something far more dangerous than revenge. He had time. 2 years passed in the shadows. Above, kings died and dragons rose. Robb Stark was murdered at a wedding soaked in red. Catelyn thrown into the river. Jon Snow stabbed. And the North, unbroken yet bleeding, still whispered his name. In Winterfell, the Boltons reigned with flayed skin. In the Riverlands, hope died. But in the shadows, the last wolf breathed. Varys's network stretched far, but Ned's patience stretched further. When Tyrion fled across the sea, Ned watched. When Daenerys rose in Slaver's Bay, he listened. When Stannis marched on the wall, he waited, because now he saw the game differently. Honor had failed. Justice had bled. But from the shadows, power could rise. And then came the Raven. It arrived wrapped in black, and signed, unreadable to any but him. A symbol only Varys and he shared. The North remembers. It read, "The bastard lives. The Bolton bleeds. Your time is now." The letter had no name, no crest, but it burned like wildfire in his chest. He escaped that night. No chains, no guards. Only cloaks, tunnels, and the blood of the guards he didn't kill. The city above never noticed. A storm raged. Lightning screamed. And into that chaos, Eddard Stark vanished again, this time by sea. A hidden ship, a smuggler loyal to Varys. No gold exchanged, only silence. When he stepped onto the shores of White Harbor months later, no one knew his name. His beard was gray, his back bent, his eyes colder than the winds around him. He was no longer a lord, no longer Eddard. He was a ghost of the North, and ghosts had work to do. But here's where it gets insane, because what Ned found when he returned home wasn't the North he had left. Winterfell was a ruin. The Boltons ruled with cruelty. The small folk whispered fear. And Jon Snow, Jon, the boy he raised, the boy with ghost-white skin and black curls, was now Lord Commander of the Night's Watch, standing on the wall, with dead men rising beneath his feet. Pause. Did you feel that? Because if Ned had any plan at all, it died the second he realized what had become the realm. Everything he believed in had crumbled. And now, The war wasn't about thrones or banners. It was about survival, of family, of legacy, of the realm itself. But Ned couldn't reveal himself. Not yet. He was a dead man, remember? The North needed to believe. And John couldn't know. Not until the pieces were ready. So Ned moved like a ghost. He traveled through villages, cloaked and quiet, whispering rebellion. He found men who still wore the direwolf. He gave them coin, orders, secrets, and in the shadows, a new army began to rise. He watched Ramsay Bolton from afar, his cruelty, his madness, the way he treated Sansa like chattel. Ned wanted to slit his throat with his own hands. But not yet. The wolf had to wait. And then Jon died. The raven came at dawn. The bastard is fallen. The wall bleeds. Winter is here. Ned fell to his knees. The snow swallowed his scream. But the next raven, oh gods, the next raven changed everything. Jon Snow lives. And not just lived, he had risen from death, and was marching south. Now imagine this. A man who died to save his daughters, a man who hid while his son died, finally sees a second son, reborn from death, marching to reclaim Winterfell. Can you feel that? That rage? That hope? That impossible fear? Because Ned Stark was done waiting. He sent a final raven to Varys. The wolf is awake. And from the shadows, in the north where legends are born, the hidden king began to move. The snow fell harder as Ned moved northward, its weight pressing against him like the memory of everything he'd lost. He didn't travel with bannermen, didn't wear the Stark sigil, and never spoke his name. But each step he took toward Winterfell carried the quiet fury of a father, a lord, and a ghost long thought gone. The north whispered of a coming storm, and Ned was that storm, silent, cold, and ready to reclaim what was stolen. The raven had said Jon lived, that he was marching to face Ramsay Bolton, that he was not alone. Sansa had escaped. Sansa, his little girl, alive, fighting back. And suddenly, honor no longer felt like a cage. It felt like a sword in his hand. He couldn't walk openly into the battle. The realm believed him dead, and that illusion was his armor. But Ned had no interest in glory. He didn't need a crown. He only needed to see Ramsay bleed, to see Sansa free, and to place his faith once more in the children he had tried to protect from a world that devoured innocence. The road to Winterfell was treacherous, filled with snowdrifts and broken men. He passed deserters from both sides, corpses half buried in frost, and villages gutted by war. But the North remembered. In hushed tones, old men by his fire spoke of wolves in the dark, of a Stark whose shadow walked behind them, of justice returning. And in 2 days from Winterfell, he heard the rumors. The bastard of Winterfell marches with wildlings, said a farmer. He's got a giant with him. Gods be good, whispered a young boy. And Sansa Stark, she leads him, like a true lady of Winterfell. Ned listened from a corner, hood drawn low. He didn't speak. He simply smiled behind the shadows. The children he raised were now leading armies. The North might survive after all. That night, he lit no fire. Instead, he sat alone beneath a pine tree, sharpening a blade he'd taken from a dead Fry scout weeks earlier. Ice was gone. His great sword, shattered and reforged into blades for a Lannister queen. Let them keep it. He needed no Valyrian steel. Just purpose. Just vengeance. Just one shot at the flayed bastard who wore his house like a skin. The next day, he saw them, from a ridge overlooking the battlefield. Ned arrived just as the first horn sounded. Snow choked the valley between the two forces. Jon's army looked ragged but resolute. Tormund stood by him, wild and grim. Davos Seaworth, faithful as ever, rode beside them. And there, his eyes caught her. Sansa, clad in stark gray, the wind tugging at her furs. Her face cold, unreadable, grown, hardened, but unmistakably a Stark. Then he saw Ramsay, smiling that smile, that smug, rotting grin, his armor clean, his soldiers lined like trophies. He paraded Rickon like bait, the youngest wolf. Ned's heart clenched. His boy, his baby boy, alive, but only just in chains, dragged like a dog. Ned had to grip a tree to keep from charging down that ridge right then and there. Instead, he watched. He waited. The battle would play out as it must. He'd waited years. He could wait a few hours more. But here's where it gets crazy. The battle wasn't just a fight. It was chaos. Ramsay unleashed his dogs, his arrows, his traps. Rickon ran, zigzagging, terrified, but the arrows still found him. Ned looked away. He couldn't bear to see his youngest fall. Jon broke, charged, alone, trapped, surrounded, bodies piled like butchered cattle. And then, just when it looked lost, the Knights of the Vale rode in. Sansa's plan. Littlefinger's whisper. It turned the tide. The Bolton forces shattered. Jon reached Ramsay. Fists flew. Rage exploded. The bastard bled. But he didn't die. Not yet. He was taken, shackled, dragged into the very halls he once desecrated. And Ned Stark? He walked into Winterfell through a postern gate, unseen, as snow turned red in the courtyard. He didn't reveal himself. Not yet. He moved through the castle like a spirit, dodging servants, avoiding guards. He knew every stone, every passage. This was his home. He moved to the crypts first, to see his wife, his brother, to stand where he once stood as a boy, where his children once played, where he promised Catelyn they would be safe. He broke down. For the first time in years, he let it out. The pain, the guilt, the failure. Then he wiped his face, pulled his head back up, and walked straight toward the kennels. That's where Ramsay was taken. Jon had decided justice would be poetic. Ramsay's own hounds would be the executioners. Sansa stood watch. Cold, silent. The dog snarled. And just before the gate opened, Ned stepped into the shadows behind her. "You did well, my daughter," he said. She didn't turn. Not at first. The voice didn't seem real. She thought it was in her head. But then she felt the breath behind her. She turned, and the world stopped. Her face went pale. Her mouth opened, but no words came. Tears welled up instantly. "Father," she whispered. He placed a hand on her shoulder. "I'm sorry," he said, "for everything. But I'm here now." She collapsed into his arms, shaking. "You were dead. You! How?" But he only held her. There were no words strong enough for what had passed between them. They watched Ramsay die together. After, Ned asked only one thing. "Tell no one." "Not yet." Sansa nodded. The North didn't need a ghost king. Not yet. But Ned Stark had returned, and he had plans. Over the next few weeks, he met with trusted allies in secret. Davos, Tormund, Glover, Manderley. They didn't believe at first. Then they saw his face, heard his voice, and one by one, they bent the knee not to Jon, not to Sansa, but to the hidden king of the North, the man who had risen from death not by magic, but by will alone. But he didn't take power. He gave it. He met with Jon in the Godswood, late at night, alone. Jon didn't recognize him at first. The beard, the age, the sorrow. But when he saw the eyes, those Stark eyes, he knew they didn't embrace. Not at first. They stared. Years of lies, burdens, and pain between them. Then Jon said, "Why?" Ned replied, "Because if I had lived, they would have died. And you are not just my son. You are the realm's hope now." Jon didn't understand. Not fully. Not yet. But Ned wasn't finished. He had one more secret to give. The one secret he had buried with all the rest. The one truth that could reshape the realm again. He looked Jon in the eye, and he said, "You are not my bastard." Jon froze. "What?" "You are Lyanna's son, Rhaegar's son. Your name is Aegon Targaryen." And just like that, the fire returned to Winterfell. Jon didn't speak. He didn't move. The snow fell in silence, coating his hair and shoulders, but he barely noticed. The gods were around them, once a sacred place of prayer, now felt like a tomb, sealing the ghost of a man who shouldn't exist, and a truth too heavy for the wind to carry. Ned stood before him, older, worn thin by shadows and silence, but unflinching. "I lied to everyone," he said. even to Caitlin, especially to you. But I did it to protect you. Jon's eyes narrowed. From what? From everyone, Ned said. From Robert. From the crown. From the truth. The words tasted like blood on Ned's tongue. All those years pretending. All those winters watching Jon carry shame that wasn't his. And now, finally, the fire was being passed to the boy who'd been forged in it. Jon's voice was low, hoarse. So, who am I? You are the son of Rhaegar Targaryen and Lyanna Stark. They were married in secret. You were born during war. Your mother died giving birth to you. She begged me to keep you safe. I swore it on her blood. Jon turned away. He couldn't breathe. The weirwood loomed over him, bleeding red through its bark, watching him like a god waiting for a judgment. I'm not a Stark, he muttered. Ned stepped closer. You're more Stark than I ever was. More Stark than Robb, than Rickon. You carry my sister's blood, and you were raised in Winterfell. You are my son, in every way that matters. Jon's fist clenched. And a Targaryen. Yes, Ned said. You're fire and ice. But here's where it gets crazy. Because while Jon was still reeling from that truth, the storm that would test it was already forming beyond the wall. Word had come from Eastwatch, White Walkers, not just whispers, not just tales. Real, marching, killing, bringing death with them. The army of the dead was no longer a tale told to scare children. It was real, and it was moving south. Jon had no time to mourn his identity. No time to question if he was Aegon or Jon or something in between, because war was coming, and the wall would not hold. Ned felt it too. The way the wind carried more than snow, the way the earth whispered underfoot. Death was coming, and the North needed more than a king. It needed unity, strategy, fire. The old ways were dead. There was no room left for pride or vengeance, just survival. And so Ned made a choice. He revealed himself to the Northern Lords, to the Wildlings, to the Vale Knights. He stood before them all in the hall of Winterfell, gray-haired, gaunt, and alive. The uproar was immediate. Some thought it a trick. Some wept. Others knelt without hesitation. The North remembered. The North bled for the Starks. And now, their true wolf had returned. But Ned did not reclaim his title. He placed his hand on Jon's shoulder and raised his voice. This is your king, he declared. Not because of blood, but because he was willing to die for the realm when it gave him nothing. Because he stood when others ran. Because he earned it. And the hall exploded. The chants rang loud and raw. King in the North. King in the North. Jon stood there, stunned, still reeling. He had led battles, faced death, risen from the grave, and now he held the North in his palm, not by conquest, not by birth, but by truth. But there were consequences. Word spread fast, faster than Ned had hoped. South of Winterfell, ravens took flight. In King's Landing, Cersei read the report with wine-stained fingers. Ned Stark is alive, she hissed. Jaime blinked in disbelief. And the bastard he raised has the North. But she wasn't the only one who learned the truth. In Dragonstone, Daenerys Targaryen read the same raven with trembling fingers. Aegon Targaryen, she whispered. Her nephew, her blood, and perhaps her rival. Tyrion stood beside her, silent. This changed everything. The war, the alliance, the very claim she thought was hers alone. And suddenly, Jon's greatest strength, his identity, became a threat to everyone else. Meanwhile, the North prepared. Ned and Jon met in the crypts again, this time not in shadows, but in candlelight. You said I was hope? Jon said. What if I failed them? Ned smiled faintly, then failed with honor. But I don't think you will. They began building alliances. Gendry was brought to Winterfell, his hammer forging weapons day and night. Samwell Tarly arrived next, carrying books, scrolls, secrets of dragonglass and Valyrian steel. Arya returned as well, silent, changed, deadlier than before. She didn't cry when she saw Ned. She just stared, then hugged him like she might never let go again. But Sansa changed. She had led. She had ruled. And now her father, her brother, her enemies, all threatened the power she'd found. Her smiles grew colder. Her eyes watched Jon too closely. Whispers followed her. Littlefinger's poison still lingered. And here's where the tension builds. Because even as they prepared for the dead, cracks formed in the living. Northerners questioned Jon's loyalty when Daenerys arrived. They saw dragons, not salvation. They saw Targaryen fire, not Stark blood. And Ned saw it too. He saw how Jon looked at Daenerys, how she looked back. He feared love would undo everything. Daenerys brought fire and fury, but also pride. She demanded loyalty. She refused compromise. She wanted to rule, not just fight. And Jon, caught between blood and bond, struggled to balance what he'd become. Ned pulled Jon aside one night. "You trust her?" Jon nodded. "With my life." "But not with the realm," Ned said. Jon didn't answer. Then came the greatest shock of all. Bran returned. And with him, the full truth. Not just about Jon. About everything. The Night King. The Long Night. The dagger. The betrayal. The war beyond wars. And Bran saw Ned. Truly saw him. "You were meant to die," Bran said. "I didn't," Ned replied. "Yet here you are," Bran said. "Maybe that's the point." Winterfell braced itself. The wall fell. The dead marched. And as the Great War approached, one thing became clear. Ned Stark surviving changed everything. Jon was no longer a lone wolf. He had a father at his side. He had the truth behind him. He had fire in front of him. But the dead were coming. And they didn't care about truth, or blood, or names. They only brought silence. And death. The horn sounded just before dawn. Long, low, and shaking the very roots of Winterfell. Soldiers scrambled to their posts. Archers lined the walls, and the dead, those frozen, merciless things, emerged from the woods like a plague with no cure. The sky was black, not with night, but with dread. Every man and woman standing atop those battlements knew one thing. This wasn't war. It was extinction. Ned Stark stood on the ramparts, cloaked in black fur, the wind whipping through his gray hair as the dead approached. He'd seen battle. He'd fought rebellions, dual traitors, and buried brothers. But nothing had prepared him for this. The enemy had no fear, no mercy, no end. Only hunger. Jon stood beside him, ghost pacing like a white shadow, eyes glowing. Arya crouched atop the wall, her hand already gripping the hilt of her dagger. Sansa watched from the highest tower, her eyes locked on the horizon. This was their home, and this was their last stand. Daenerys circled overhead on Drogon, Regal following close. The dragons roared, breathing fire into the sky as if trying to hold back the night itself. But fire wasn't enough. Not yet. The ground began to shake. Thousands of undead poured out of the tree-line. Limbs broken, eyes glowing, faces frozen in silent screams. Horses galloped beside them, skeletal and foaming. Giants thundered behind, their steps cracking the ice. The Night King stood far back, still as death, watching it all unfold. No words, no orders, just destruction. Ned turned to Jon. "You lead the flank," he said. "I'll hold the main gate." Jon shook his head. "You should be in the crypts. If they break through." "They won't," Ned said flatly. "Not while I still draw breath." The dead slammed into the front lines like a wave of knives. Men screamed. Blades clashed. The dragons dove, burning dozens at a time. But for every one that fell, 5 more rose. Arya darted between shadows, slicing necks, stabbing hearts, vanishing again. She was faster than death, more ghost than girl. Jon fought at the front, long claws singing as he cut through whites like weeds. His every movement was fury and precision. Ghost lunged beside him, blood spraying across his white fur. Tormund laughed through blood-soaked teeth, swinging an axe like a madman. Sam stumbled, fell, killed, and stumbled again. They were losing. Slowly, surely, bleeding from 1,000 wounds. And then the gates cracked. The main gate splintered under the weight of a giant wight, its bones creaking as it tore the doors open with monstrous strength. Panic surged. The line broke. But Ned Stark stood his ground. He stepped into the breach with nothing but steel in his hand and fire in his heart. He slashed the giant across the knee, then drove his blade through its eye. It roared, fell, crushed half a dozen whites beneath it. Men rallied around him. "The North remembers," one screamed. "For Ned Stark," another roared. And suddenly the line held. Just barely. But in the crypts below, a different horror began. The dead woke. Skeletal hands burst from the soil. Ancient kings clawed their way out of stone. Women screamed. Children cried. Sansa and Tyrion drew blades, back to back, staring down their worst nightmare. "If we're going to die," Tyrion muttered, "let's at least make it interesting." Sansa didn't smile. She stabbed the first corpse that came close. Above, Jon saw it. The breach in the crypts. The chaos. He turned to head back, only to be blocked by a wall of whites. Trapped. Cut off. And then the dragons fell. The Night King raised his hand. Vagor, undead, burning blue, swooped from the sky and slammed into Regal. The sky ignited. Drogon shrieked, fire trailing from his wings. Daenerys held on, screaming orders, but the Night King had already mounted his own beast. Ice clashed with fire midair, and it was not clear which would survive. And here's where it gets insane, because Bran was waiting, tethered to the weirwood tree in the Godswood, surrounded by Theon and his Ironborn. Bran's eyes rolled back into his head. He was gone, warging deeper than he'd ever dared. His mind danced across ravens, wolves, winds. He reached the Night King's thoughts. He saw it all, and then he found the key. The Night King wasn't just here to kill. He was here to end the memory of man, to erase names, houses, histories. That's why he came for Bran. The three-eyed raven held the truth, and the Night King wanted silence. Bran whispered across the void, "Not today." Arya leapt from the shadows. The Night King caught her by the throat, and Ned Stark saw his daughter, weightless in the air, about to die. He roared, breaking through a wave of whites, leapt across the burning ground, and drove his sword, not the Night King, but into Arya's arm. She dropped her dagger, fell, caught it in her other hand, and drove it into the Night King's heart. Shatter! The Night King exploded in frost and glass, the sound like a scream through a canyon. Every white fell. The silence was sudden, crushing. The wind stopped. Ned dropped to his knees. Jon ran to him. "Father!" Arya knelt beside him, her hands shaking. "Why did you?" Ned smiled through bloodied lips. "Because she had to live." They carried him inside. He wasn't dying. Not yet, but his body was broken. The battle was won. The North had held. But the war wasn't over, because now the world knew who Jon really was. And the Dragon Queen was watching him with new eyes. Not love. Not yet. Something colder. Fear. And Cersei? She sat on the Iron Throne, smiling, as ravens arrived with news of northern victories. "They bled," she whispered, sipping wine. "Let them bleed more." Because the game had only just begun. And the hidden king of the North? He wasn't finished playing it. Winterfell still stood, but it no longer felt alive. The battle was won, the Night King shattered. But the silence that followed was not peace. It was a quiet before the storm. Smoke curled from the ruins of towers, black against gray skies. Blood stained the snow in thick, dark patches. Corpses of the fallen were being dragged into piles, some already burning, others yet to be named. And through it all, Ned Stark sat by the fire in the great hall, wrapped in furs, his sword resting across his knees, his face lit only by the dancing flames. He was not just a man who survived. He was a man reborn through loss, betrayal, and blood. A man the world had forgotten, now remembered all too well. Jon stood across from him, staring into the same fire, his brow furrowed. "The dead are gone," he said quietly, "but I've never seen the living more divided." Ned didn't answer at first. He reached into the fire, pulled out a small piece of charwood, crushed it between his fingers. "That's because war doesn't end with victory," he said. "It ends with what comes after." And what came after was chaos. Daenerys had barely spoken to Jon since the truth of his birth was confirmed by Sam and Bran. Her eyes had changed. Where there was once warmth, now there was calculation. The Iron Throne was no longer just a dream. It was slipping through her fingers. And Jon, unwilling to kneel again, unwilling to lie about who he was, had become more than a rival. He had become a threat. Arya saw it first. She watched Daenerys in silence, tracking her movements, reading the faces of her Unsullied, the tension in Grey Worm's shoulders. Sansa, too, knew the shift. She had never trusted Daenerys, and now she had proof of her instincts. She didn't smile when we won, Sansa said. She only asked who bent the knee. Tyrion was stuck in the middle, caught between a queen growing colder and allies he once mistrusted but now admired. He confided in Varys late at night, pacing before the hearth. "She's not who I thought she was," he muttered. "She wants to rule. But ruling after this will demand more than fire." Varys only nodded. It made a man truth. And that truth, Jon's parentage, his claim to the Iron Throne, was already leaking beyond the north. Ravens flew. Men talked. Some drank and shouted it in taverns. Others whispered it like a dangerous prayer. Aegon Targaryen, heir to the 7 kingdoms. The king who never asked for a crown. The realm began to stir. Meanwhile, Cersei built walls higher in King's Landing. She gathered mercenaries, refortified the Red Keep, and smiled with every raven she read. "Let the dragons fight each other," she said to Qyburn. "Let the North tear itself apart. When they're done, I'll rule over ashes." But she underestimated something. Ned Stark was not the man she thought she'd killed. And Jon Snow was no longer a bastard. They weren't coming south as conquerors. They were coming as something far more dangerous. Survivors. And here's where things start to twist. Daenerys called a council, not to share power, to remind them who had the dragons, who had the Unsullied, who had won the battles. Jon stood beside her, silent. Ned watched her speak, noting every shift in tone. She promised liberation, justice, peace, but her eyes were on the throne. She named Jon her ally, but never once called him family. And that silence, that unspoken rejection of his birthright, that was the beginning of the next war. Later that night, in the Godswood, Arya found Jon. "She'll burn King's Landing," she said plainly, "if she thinks it's the only way." Jon didn't argue. "She's not mad," Arya continued. "Not yet, but she's close. And people who get close to mad kings, they either kneel or die." Ned joined them. He looked at his son, not the boy he raised, but the man he'd become. "What will you do?" Jon didn't know, but he would soon, because 2 days later, Daenerys stood in the courtyard of Winterfell and demanded loyalty. Publicly, she named herself the rightful queen, the savior. She turned to Jon. "Tell them," she said, "tell them you will serve me, that you will never claim the throne." Jon hesitated, just for a second, but it was enough. Sansa stepped forward. "And what if he does claim it? Will you burn him too?" The air froze. Daenerys' jaw tightened. The Unsullied shifted. Then she smiled. "He is my family," she said. "He would never betray me." But she didn't believe it, and neither did anyone else. Ned watched it all with the patience of a man who knew what came next. This was no longer about dragons or White Walkers. It was about the truth, the line between ruling and destroying. That night, Ned summoned Varys and Tyrion. He laid out clearly, "She will not share power," he said, "and the North will not be ruled by fire." Tyrion whispered, "Do you mean to kill her?" "No," Ned replied, "but I won't let her burn this realm to rule it." He looked at Varys, "And neither will you." Varys' eyes narrowed. "There's another option." Ned said nothing. He didn't need to, because the wheel Daenerys wanted to break, it was already cracking. And the Dragon Queen, once the realm's greatest hope, was now the realm's greatest gamble. The march south began the next day. Daenerys led the army, her dragons flying overhead. Jon rode beside her. Ned stayed behind, claiming age, wounds, excuses. But in truth, he stayed to prepare the realm for what came after, because he knew, deep down, that only one dragon would return from fire, and the price of peace will be paid in Targaryen blood. King's Landing shimmered in the southern sun, its red rooftops and golden spires defiant against the coming storm. But beneath the heat and grandeur, the city buzzed with dread. Whispers filled the taverns. The North was coming. The dragons were coming. And with them, Aegon Targaryen, king in name, bastard in blood, myth made flesh. Some cheered, some trembled, but none felt safe. Cersei stood atop the Red Keep, her face stone-hard, the mountain behind her like death with a sword. She read every raven, counted every step. Her armies were tired, paid in gold but loyal only in coin. Euron Greyjoy paced the harbor with madness in his eyes, his fleet waiting for Daenerys' fire. And Qyburn whispered poisons in her ear. "The people won't love her," he said, "but they may fear her." Cersei smiled, then let them burn. But the North came differently than she expected. Jon rode at the head of the army, his Stark banner beside Daenerys' dragon sigil. He wore no crown, gave no speeches. He was a soldier, not a king. And yet every man who marched beside him knew the truth. He had a stronger claim than the woman flying above. Stronger and quieter. And that made him dangerous. Daenerys barely spoke to him now. She stayed with her dragons, her unsullied, her fire. Rhaegal was dead, brought down by Euron Scorpion's days before. Only Drogon remained. And something had changed in her eyes since the North. She was no longer fighting for freedom. She was fighting for something else. For fear. For revenge. For the throne that kept slipping through her fingers. Tyrion saw it. Varys saw it. Arya saw it. But Jon? He still hoped. Until the bells. The siege was brutal. The Golden Company shattered beneath the first charge. The gates exploded under Drogon's fire. The Unsullied flooded the city like a black tide. The Lannister army surrendered fast. Too fast. Cersei's plan crumbled in her own hands. And as the bells rang across King's Landing, signaling surrender, the people cheered. They thought it was over. But Daenerys never stopped. She stared at the Red Keep. She remembered her family's bones burned in its dungeons. She thought of Missandei's last words, Dracarys, and in that moment, she chose fire over mercy. Drogon screamed, and the burning began. Jon watched in horror as women and children were incinerated, as the streets became rivers of ash. Grey Worm slaughtered men who had already dropped their swords. The Unsullied showed no mercy. This wasn't justice. This was annihilation. And Daenerys, her face blank, her body still, rode the dragon like a god. Arya ran through the fire, trying to save who she could, her body covered in ash and blood. She watched mothers burn, horses explode, children turn to blackened husks. She fell once, twice, nearly died under the rubble, and through it all, she saw Drogon again and again, a shadow of death circling above. That night, the city smoldered. The Red Keep was gone. The streets were lined with corpses. And Daenerys stood atop the steps of what remained of the throne room, cloaked in soot and silence. She declared herself queen not of Westeros, but of a new world. "They don't get to choose," she said. "I will free them, even if they burn." Jon stood below her, his cloak torn, his heart hollow. And here's where it shatters. Because Ned Stark arrived. He hadn't come with the army. He had ridden south alone, under shadow, arriving at the edge of the battlefield just as the smoke lifted. He saw the city in ruins. He saw the bodies. And in his soul, he felt the echo of every mistake he'd ever made. This was not what he died for. This was not what Jon was born for. He entered the ruins silently, moving through ash and flame. No one recognized him. To them, he was just another old man wandering the end of the world. But he climbed the steps of the throne room, slowly, carefully, and Jon saw him. Their eyes met. Jon's voice cracked. "You came." "I had to," Ned said. Daenerys turned. Her face was calm. Her voice was gentle. "You're Ned Stark." He nodded. "And you are Aerys' daughter." She smiled. "I am more than that." "No," Ned said. "You are exactly that." She didn't like that. But Jon stepped between them. "It's over," he said. "No." Daenerys replied, her eyes locked on the Iron Throne behind her. It's just begun. Ned stepped closer. You burned a city? I saved a world. From what? From themselves. And Ned knew then, truly knew, that she was beyond reach. He looked at Jon. You know what must be done. Jon's hand fell to his sword. She's still our queen. No, Ned whispered. She's a fire that will never stop burning. Jon trembled. He walked forward. Daenerys smiled at him, stepped into his arms, and with tears in his eyes, he drove the blade into her heart. She gasped, not in pain, in shock, as if love had betrayed her, as if destiny had lied. Drogon felt it. He landed beside the ruined steps, let out a scream that shook the foundations of the earth. He burned the Iron Throne to molten slag. Then he picked up Daenerys' body and flew away into the ash-filled sky. Gone. Jon fell to his knees. Ned placed a hand on his shoulder. You ended it. But peace did not come easily. The Unsullied demanded justice. The lords and ladies of Westeros met among the ruins to decide Jon's fate. Tyrion pleaded for reason. Arya threatened death. Sansa demanded the North remain free. And Ned Stark, alive, real, undeniable, took the floor. I was the first man to die for a lie in this war, he said. Let my truth end it. He revealed everything. How he survived. Why he hid. How Jon was never a bastard. And the council listened. And for the first time in years, they chose peace. Bran was crowned king, not for power, but for memory. He named Tyrion his hand. The realm was broken into pieces. The North stood alone, free under Sansa. Arya sailed west. Jon was sent back to the Wall, not as punishment, but as choice, as freedom. And Ned returned to Winterfell, not as a lord, not as a king, but as a father. He walked the halls, touched the stone, watched the snow fall. He visited the crypts, spoke to his wife, to his brother, to his children, and when the wind howled through the trees, he finally smiled, because the North remembered, and the realm would never forget again.